you guys sound good. We should sing Amazing Grace every Sunday. You guys sound amazing, actually. Oh, yeah, I got to get verse 5 in there. So the prophet Jeremiah, in our first reading today, was actually, you might have missed it. It's very subtle and contextual, but he was actually calling the prophet Hananiah on the carpet. You see, the people had been carried away, most of the people into exile in the land of Babylon. The city of Jerusalem had been sacked. The treasures of the temple had been desecrated, destroyed, and the precious things taken thousands of miles away to Babylon. And Hananiah stood up in the temple with the remainder of the people that were there and told them what they wanted to hear. He told them God's called, the time has come for the Babylonians to be defeated, and the people will be returned, and the treasures will be returned. And I thought, that's a pretty good short-term strategy for a prophet. It'll work out for a little while. You're going to be everybody's favorite guy, But Jeremiah says that the burden of proof for a prophet that prophesies peace is on that prophet who prophesies peace. The proof is in the pudding. He says, we'll see. All the prophets have spoken difficult truths for all of the years that there have been prophets. And you're a prophet that wants to tell people what they want to hear. Well, I had a little bit of a similar reaction to the gospel reading today because it's a nice gospel. It's a lovely gospel reading. It really sounds like something simple, easy that we want to hear. Welcome people, give them a cup of cold water. Check, Jesus, we're good. We're off and running, right? It's especially compared to the Gospels for the last few weeks. If you've missed church, if you've been on vacation, that was a fortunate thing for you. We had a very difficult couple of gospel readings, including last Sunday when poor Diana had to preach about fathers and children betraying each other to death on Father's Day. It was pretty rough. But it was this gospel reading that we have today is actually part of the same set of passages about mission. It's called the missionary discourse, and it's Jesus sending his disciples out into the world and them, what they're going to preach, what they're going to find, sort of sending them out into the lion's den, and giving them very specific instructions about what they're to pack, if you remember that a couple weeks ago, how they're to receive hospitality and enter into people's homes, what to do if they don't receive hospitality, and then some of the costs of that discipleship that we heard about last week. But this week, Jesus seems to be assuring them that the people who welcome them will also receive a reward. The one who welcomes a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. The one who welcomes a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. And the one who welcomes even one of these little ones and gives them even a cup of cold water in my name will not lose their reward. And I have to tell you, I had a little bit of a reaction to this when I first read the gospel, particularly after all of those difficult gospels. My reaction was not unlike that of the older son in the parable of the prodigal son, where the younger son goes and profitably spends all of his father's inheritance, and he comes back home when he's destitute, and the father welcomes him, and the older son says, hey, wait a minute, I've been here all this time. So I had the hey, wait a minute moment. Hey, wait a minute. As disciples, as apostles, we're sent out with this difficult good news, this world-changing, world-challenging good news. We're told to expect, not the best welcome, but then we're told that the one who welcomes us will receive the same reward, right? How fair is that? Not fair at all. Jesus is not super into fairness. And yet, as my husband pointed out to me, the reward of the prophet, the reward of the righteous person, the reward of the apostle, we've heard about what that reward might look like. And we've seen we don't have to go back as far as Nazi Germany when people who harbored Jews were given the reward of those people that they were trying to protect, to see that that pattern is repeating itself in our day and age as people who have stood up for immigrants and the defenseless have received that reward. So it's a problematic text, actually. It seems simple, but we don't know exactly what Jesus is saying here, except that there does seem to be something essential about human kindness. That there does seem to be something essential, no matter who you are or where you find yourself, about seeing another human being for who they are, about meeting them where they are, about meeting even their most basic human needs for protection, for water on a hot day in a desert. And actually, what I feel when I take a step back from this gospel reading, what I think is actually behind it and underneath it, and why I'm actually so sure that as many times as we turn the wheel of the kaleidoscope and get these pieces to fall into different places, hospitality is at the core of what it means to follow Jesus. It's because ultimately we are all recipients of the hospitality of God. God is the original welcomer. God is always welcoming us with open arms, no matter what, right? 24/7. Welcome to this wonderful planet that I created for you. I made the sun rise again today, right? I've given you food and water and plants and nature to revive yourself. I've set you in human communities. Welcome, welcome, come into my house, right? And the original mi casa es su casa. That's what God gives to us. My home is your home, right? Literally everything that I have and all that I am is yours. Right? This is the welcome, the unconditional welcome and mercy and love and grace that we receive from God all of the time. And we just have to look up there at that cross to know how we often, as human beings, have responded to God's hospitality. And yet, God keeps offering it. And it's into this dance of hospitality, no matter what, this unconditional, unending welcome that God invites us. And I've come to believe that we are able to offer that welcome to others to the extent and to the depth that we have received and allowed that welcome into our own hearts. So I'd like to invite you to think this morning about the time in your life that you have felt the most welcome. Can you think of a time in a story? I would love it if you, at coffee hour or while we're packing meals or sharing meals after church today, if you shared that story with somebody else. I'm going to share mine with you right now. We had been living in El Salvador for a month. I was newly ordained and serving a church in a community that the U.S. State Department told me no American citizen had any place ever going to. So that was where my church was. And we hadn't gotten a car yet, so I was taking the bus. The gangs who controlled the neighborhood that I lived would run sort of a racket on the bus where all the bus lines, where the bus line drivers and companies would have to pay the gangs a certain amount of protection fee. And if they didn't pay the fee, then they would get on the bus and rob people. So apparently somebody didn't pay the fee on our bus line because two young guys, I mean, the younger one might have been 13 or 14, maybe, got on the bus. One of them had a gun, one of them had a knife. There was few of us on the bus, maybe 6 or 7 of us. I was sitting there carrying way too many things. I had this lovely bag full of all of these cards that the children in the school had made for some hurricane victims, and I think it was Katrina back then. I had my grandfather's prayer book, way too many things I was carrying around in this bag, and of course, I lost the bag. And one of the guys I had my clergy collar on, he said, "What's under that? You have jewelry under that?" And I pulled out my little cross, and I said, "Yes, I have my cross. Would you like it?" He said, No, I don't want the cross." So everybody gave them their things. No one was hurt. And I got to the church and got off the bus right in front of the church, understandably quite shaken. And I went into the church, and the cleaning lady was there, Niña Cristi. Niña Cristi lived in a shack. It was a sort of cobbled together brick and cement structure. She lived on the second floor. I think the bottom floor was somebody else's garage, right next to the railroad tracks. And Nia Krista, I told her what had happened, and she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. That's awful when that happens." Of course, it had happened to her before. And she invited me home to her home. And she took me in, and she gave me food, and she gave me something to drink. And then she started rustling through her belongings, and she came out with this lovely little faux leather backpack and some other things just to give me things because I had lost my things. She gave me another cross, even though my cross wasn't taken. And it's honestly one of the moments of hospitality that I remember the most. And I got to thinking, I wonder if we remember and are able to receive welcome at a deeper level when we're in need. You think? It made me think of another time when I was driving, was newly here actually as a clergy person, I was driving back from Sacramento, and my car started to do that, oh, something's not right. I'm on Highway 80 and my car will not accelerate. I'm just coasting. So I managed to coast all the way across the causeway and into the car dealership in Davis that I took my car there way back when I had attended school there. And, it was after hours and I had to leave it and talk to the emergency people, and it was probably a battery, but they couldn't get to it tomorrow. And I called some friends in Davis, people who had been spiritual parents to me when I was a student there. And I hadn't talked to them for quite a while. This was completely out of the blue. And I said, "My car broke down. Can I spend the night?" And of course I could spend the night. And they received me into their home and took such good care of me, fed me dinner, fed me breakfast, took me back to the car dealership. I wonder if we receive hospitality more deeply when we know our need of it. The commentators that I listened to this week said, there's not a church that they've ever encountered that would say, we're not a welcoming church. Every church says we're a welcoming church. But of course, that's the perspective of those who are already inside. I think we are a welcoming congregation. In fact, I know that we are. And there is always room to expand our welcome. To look around and to say, if I didn't know where the bathroom was, or, where the front door to the office was, or how to get a drink of water, if I didn't know that, how would I know it? If I came onto this campus and I was differently abled, or I spoke a different language, how would I be able to navigate that? What kind of welcome? How can we expand and extend our welcome by thinking about not just the welcome that we receive and feel every time we come onto this campus, but what others might feel? This term, the hospitality of God, got into me as I was thinking about today's sermon, and it rang a little distant bell in my head. And I remembered that one of my mentors, along with her good colleague, had written a book by that name, The Hospitality of God, a number of years ago. This was the bishop at that time of the Diocese of El Camino Real and the Bishop of Gloucester in England. And they together wrote this book, which, actually isn't about churches welcoming people specifically. The book is about what's called emerging or emergent church, or in the UK, it's called fresh expressions of church. And these are communities, sometimes offshoots of existing churches, and sometimes communities that just spring up kind of organically, where people are trying to offer a welcome to folks who are maybe seekers, or maybe even people that have felt rejected or not welcomed in traditional church settings. And so they do things quite differently. And I had a chance to visit one of these churches when I was staying up in Seattle a couple of years ago. It's called COTA, which stands for Church of the Apostles. And as I went in, it looked very much, and the service felt very much like a traditional church service, a little funky, a little different. And except during the sermon time, they had what they called open space. And for about 15 or 20 minutes, you could sort of wander around the space. You could visit with people if you wanted, but there were stations set up where you can engage scripture and the spirituality in different ways. I chose to go off to a little side chapel and be in silence for those 20 minutes because I really needed it. And then when it came time for communion, everyone was welcome, of course, and we went up to receive communion. I put up my hands, and what I received was a piece of warm, from a bread maker, freshly baked, still warm, gluten-free bread. And of course the wine, the chalice. And I have to tell you, it was so delicious, I wanted seconds. There weren't any. They got eaten all up after the church service. But I thought, what an incredible symbol of hospitality, right? Warm, fresh-baked communion bread. And I felt truly and deeply welcomed. And I wonder, I'm so curious about what God's calling us to in order to welcome the people that aren't here, right? God might be calling us to another worship time that's not on a Sunday morning. God might be calling us to all kinds of crazy things, right? Where are we willing to go? What are we willing to do? What are we willing to give up even to welcome those who God is already welcoming? There's one other twist to this gospel that I want to bring in, and that's if you turn it one more time. Jesus is talking to the disciples who are being sent out among, like sheep among wolves. We're talking about welcoming people here onto this campus, right? But what would it be like in the places where we are in the world to pay attention to how it is that we are people who bring good news and what welcome that good news receives? Doesn't mean we need to talk about church or Jesus or God all the time, but to be known as we are in fact known. I know you are all known as people who are people of faith, people who are somehow involved in this church thing, and that's kind of weird. So what would it be like in the grocery store, at bocce, at the PTA, at the Rotary Club, at the gas station, to be there as a person, right, who in your person brings the good news of God's welcome? And just to be curious about what kind of welcome your welcome would receive. Because it's just possible that if you're open about that the curiosity of others, that their desire for a conversation might come up. And they might be waiting for your welcome and might even welcome it. This is not unintentional, silly language with too many welcomes. You see, the welcome is a dance. The hospitality is a dance. It's the dance of the Trinity, the dance into which we are all invited as we share that welcome of God's love, ever widening circles with our world. I've said these things to you, beloved, in the name of our friend and our Savior, Jesus the Christ. Amen.